Mission Log, Alan Marcus, Deputy Commander, Exploration Vessel, Veritas Nomad. Planet Designation, Theta, P3, X117. Timestamp, 88.07.11.1422 Universal Sync. They briefed us on Theta P3, X117 back in orbit, but there's a chasm between file and field. From the observation bay, its stratosphere pulsed with auroral distortions. Permanent electrical corona flickering in radiant rings, caused by ionosphere mantle interaction on a planetary scale. Most of the astrophysics team assumed it was unstable, but Vasari overrode protocol. We burned a precision entry trajectory through the upper mesosphere, angle 21.8 degrees at 4.3 kilometers per second deceleration, adjusted for thermosphere drag and particulate flare. The Veritas Nomad's hull, polyadaptive graphene layered with phase-stabilized ceramic alloy, held as expected. The same couldn't be said for the drone probes. We lost 2 on entry. Electromagnetic disruption rendered their orientation gyros useless. They spiraled into molten clouds before we had a signal return. Theta, P3X117 has no moons, no known magnetic poles, and its orbit is elliptical, dancing unnervingly close to a red subgiant. Atmospheric composition, nitrogen-rich, traces of vanadium oxide, titanium dust, and unknown luminescent isotopes. That glow you see? It isn't bioluminescence. It's the air metabolizing light in real time. We broke cloud cover over the equatorial ridge system, 3,000 kilometers of continuous mountainous terrain. They weren't formed by plate tectonics. This world doesn't even have mobile plates. No crustal shift. The ridges are vertical extrusions, materialized directly from the mantle through pressure funnels, cooled instantly into jagged spires. It's as if the planet exhaled violence. That's when we saw it. The gold. Not a color, actual molten metal. Liquid auric elements pooled in calderas the size of lunar craters. Lakes of it. Rivers feeding from the mountains like arteries from an ancient heart. Spectral analysis confirmed the compound was primarily superheated gold, suspended with unknown heavy isotopes that kept it in a semi-fluid state at sub-boiling temperatures. It shouldn't exist, and yet, there it was, moving, breathing, glowing. We initiated landing procedures on a basaltic shelf 213 meters above Basin Delta 4, later designated Aurelia's Memory. The shelf was stable, composed of iron-heavy basalt with crystalline lacing, possibly obsidian, but modified, not by time, by design. I disembarked first, exosuit engaged at full thermal filtration. Our MKVII modular suits use localized cooling vents and reactive shielding, but even they struggled to hold stable. Microfracture alerts flickered on my HUD every 5 seconds. The ambient radiation was low, yet the magnetic field interference scrambled our surface nav systems. We were walking blind, relying on analog redundancy. Old school. I knelt to collect a soil sample. The substrate, charred magnetite granules fused with hexagonal carbon, clung to the scoop like it wanted to be held. When I brought it into the portable scanner, I saw it twitch. Not chemically reactive, responsive. The molecular lattice pulsed with harmonics, frequencies I couldn't hear but could feel, like a second pulse in my chest. Vasari looked at me through her polarized visor. This place isn't just geologically complex, it's encoded. The phrase stuck with me. Encoded. We deployed a tri-rotor drone to map the basin's perimeter. It lasted 42 seconds before the onboard systems collapsed. Not a malfunction. An unraveling. The metals in the drone's frame melted into a spiral shape midair, then dropped into the gold lake and vanished. No splash, just silence. From the ridge, I scanned the lake's surface. The gold wasn't uniform. Beneath it, distortions, geometric shadows, right angles, elliptical arcs, interlocking lattice patterns, structures. We reran the LiDAR. The signal returned distorted but clear enough. Beneath the gold was a submerged architectural grid, too regular to be natural. The main formation resembled a hex-core array, possibly a sunken facility, a memory vault, or something we had no word for. Commander Vasari whispered over comms, "We're not looking at geology. This is preservation architecture." "Or containment," I replied. We didn't speak after that. We marked the formation's coordinates and activated the tether beacon in case recovery teams ever returned. I doubt they will. Before extraction, I recorded a final log. Surface temp averaged 672 degrees Celsius at the basin edge. No organic signatures detected, no fauna, no flora. But I don't think we were alone. The lake shimmered when we stepped back, like a lens dilating. And in the reflection, I saw a different sky. As we left orbit, the Veritas Nomad's sensors briefly detected an outbound signal, short, tight band, and encrypted in a language no AI could parse. I've kept it isolated in my private data vault. When I close my eyes, I still see its waveform. 6 peaks, all golden. Mission log. Alan Marcus, Deputy Commander, Veritas Nomad. Planet designation: Obel 9E. Timestamp: 88.0715.0403 Universal Sync. We saw it glittering from 7 million kilometers out. Obel 9E's surface returned anomalous reflectivity values even before the outer system telescopes focused. At first, we thought it was atmospheric distortion or a satellite ring scattering starlight. But as the images resolved, it became clear. The planet's crust refracted light, not reflected it. We recalibrated the long-range spectrometer. What we were seeing was crystalline. Not ice, not salt, but carbon. Ultra-dense, structured, and massive. Diamonds, not flakes, not dust. Mountains. The cartographic scans showed spires erupting from the crust like geological skyscrapers, each hundreds of kilometers wide at the base, tapering into clear, jagged crowns of engineered clarity. Each range grew in triangular fractals, stacked, interlocked, and rising into the exosphere. No tectonic activity, no magma hotspots, no volcanism. This world wasn't formed. It was printed. We called it the Diamond Labyrinth. Our landing protocol was cautious. 0 lateral thrust on descent to avoid vibration fractures. Diamond under tension is strong. But diamond under asymmetric load? Catastrophic. The hull's vibration dampeners were pushed to their lowest thresholds. We came down on a plateau between 2 massive crystalline peaks, each casting rainbow coronas into the low hydrogen sky. The surface was mirror-clear in places. Our boots left no impression. Even static charge from the suits dissipated instantly, pulled down by a conductive underlayer we couldn't yet identify. I deployed the vibrocore drill on the west face of the nearest ridge. The material read as monolattice carbon, compressed at 87 gigapascals. Impossible outside a controlled lab environment. Every strike from the drill returned harmonics, clean, bell-like tones that echoed into the structure and did not return. It was hollow. Vasari and I exchanged looks. She patched in the scanning array. What we saw chilled us. a cavernous network beneath the range, tunnels, corridors, perfect in angle and spacing. They formed octagonal patterns, recursive in nature, like an information processor made of geometry. Some chambers were kilometers wide. Others were needle-thin, extending for hundreds of kilometers in linear paths that cut through the planet's core. This was no natural formation. We suited up and descended through a crack near the base, a natural vent or maybe an access port. The interior reflected our helmet lights like a million prisms in orbit. The deeper we moved, the quieter it became. Not just sonically. Our own biosigns began to dampen. No echo, no static. Even the HUD interface dimmed slightly, like the mountain was absorbing not just light, but intention. I tapped the wall. It rang like a cathedral. Then the anomaly occurred. The time counter on my wrist began to desynchronize from the ship's atomic clock. Not by seconds, by entire cycles. 1 minute, I was synced. The next, I was 0.4 seconds behind. Then 3.2 ahead. Time was being diffracted, warped, folded into the geometry of this place like light through a cut gem. Commander Vasari whispered, "Are we inside a clock?" I responded, "Or a memory." In one of the lower corridors, designated Shaft Theta C, we discovered markings, not inscriptions, absences, shapes missing from the structure, cleanly subtracted, leaving behind silhouettes in the carbon lattice, a triangle within a circle, a double helix interlocked with a wave pattern, a rotating ring of 9 nodes, faintly glowing. Each missing shape seemed to weaken local gravity by fractions. I felt it. I could jump farther here. My heartbeat slowed. Something in the room was repurposing the laws around it. I don't have a word for the fear I felt. It wasn't terror. It was insignificance, the knowledge that this planet was not a world, but an instrument left behind by something that understood entropy not as an adversary, but as material. We left a signal buoy in the main chamber, pinging on a loop at 432 Hertz. No reply. Not yet. But I swear, as we left orbit, one of the diamond peaks tilted, just slightly. The sunlight refracted off its surface and cast a perfect circle of light across our path. Not random. I've reviewed the telemetry 17 times. That ring wasn't a lens flare. It was an iris. This world wasn't dead. It was watching. Mission log. Alan Marcus, Deputy Commander, Veritas Nomad. Planet designation, Virel Theta. Timestamp, 88.07.18.2240 Universal Sync. I thought I'd seen silence. We've landed on airless moons, drifted through zero-G nebulae thick with cryodust, even survived a solar cusp event near the twin suns of Hextar Prime. But none of that prepared me for Virel Theta. There was no horizon. We exited FTL burn at suborbital range, and all we saw below us was texture. No oceans, no continents, no stone formations, just a continuous topological pattern like vascular tissue. From orbit, it looked like a neural map. Veins, roots, mycelial tunnels, but on the scale of a planet. When we adjusted the LiDAR topography for biosignature mapping, we realized this world wasn't host to life. It was life. Virel Theta is not a planet covered in plants. It is a single organism, an unbroken biosphere organismically fused to its lithosphere. A planetary super root system, 12,000 kilometers wide and at least 500 kilometers deep. We called it the root that wrapped the world. We selected a descent vector over what appeared to be a massive bloom node, an irregular elevation in the surface structure, roughly 1.2 kilometers tall and covered in ridged, fibrous membranes. No atmosphere, but the roots were venting. Gaseous plumes rose slowly in a rhythm matching a stable respiratory pattern. That's not metaphor. The planet was breathing. We landed with thermal tethers extended, anchoring directly into a fibrous shelf of the upper cortex layer. The suits stayed sealed, no telling what kind of biochem this world operated on. Surface texture underfoot felt like petrified bark, smooth, dry, and warm to the touch. Not geothermal warmth, circulatory warmth. I ran a core drill and retracted it after 1.4 meters. The internal structure was made of concentric ringed fibers, bundled like nerve tissue, pulsing with faint bioelectric currents. Our onboard spectrometer showed complex amino acids, dozens we'd never sequenced, and trace signals of self-repairing peptides. Vasari tapped into the resonance scanner. The frequencies coming from beneath us weren't random. They were modulated in tight cycles. We isolated 4 bass tones, forming a pattern that repeated every 23.6 seconds. A language? A warning? A song? Our AI interpreter flagged it as recursive logic, like a bio-algorithm. She called it the hum of planetary memory. Then things escalated. At 0400 ship time, a structure emerged. From the tangle below us, a spire began to rise, not through mechanical force, but by organic growth. Within minutes, it stood nearly 20 meters tall, shaped like a hollowed-out spiral shell. It vibrated at a frequency precisely tuned to disrupt our EVA suit comms. We switched to optical hand signals and watched in awe and dread as the structure's core unfurled and opened into a spiral stare of amber light. I stepped closer and realized it wasn't just light. It was information encoded in optical frequency. Moving along the ridges of the spiral were images, fractal data, each pulse a diagram, a memory, a code. This was a planetary interface. We uploaded 10 seconds of visual telemetry into the ship's AI. It crashed instantly. Not from corruption, from contradiction. The data contradicted known physical constants. It spoke of evolutionary timelines that began before the Big Bang, of systems that fed on possibility. Vasari's voice trembled. This planet isn't growing. It's remembering. I walked away and looked to the horizon. The root line stretched as far as I could see, pulsing, waiting, listening. There was no sun here, just a cool ambient glow radiating from under the surface, like light refracted through amber resin. No stars above, just black. I ended the log by whispering, "This world has never been alone. It remembers every visitor, and it is remembering us." Mission log, Alan Marcus, Deputy Commander, Veritas Nomad. Planet designation, Brontis Viffe X. Timestamp, 88.072.2.06.11, Universal Sync. There are worlds that whisper, and then there are worlds that scream. Brontis VX began screaming before we even arrived. 50 million kilometers out, the ship's long-range sensors detected consistent electromagnetic bursts in the 3.2 megahertz band. White noise at first, then a rising harmonic pattern, 5 pulses, 1 drop, repeating, continuous. Commander Vasari assumed atmospheric distortion. I disagreed. We reached high orbit on Cycle 7. The planet below was wrapped in coils of black cloud, rotating on a visibly tilted axis. Not a single continent or ocean breached the surface. Even from space, it was impossible to see the ground. Lightning arced across the cloud belts in planetary scale, spanning thousands of kilometers, some looping entirely around the equator before vanishing into the swirl. We performed 76 scans. No breaks in the storm system, not one. Brontis VX had not seen sunlight in what our models estimate as 11,200 Earth years, and yet it was warm. Too warm. Subsurface readings showed geothermal vents in organized grid-like formations. The core was active. Not just active, regulated. There was intelligence to this chaos. Someone had built the storm. We descended through the ionosphere wearing full electromagnetic damping shields. The hull temperature spiked. External lightning grounding rods glowed blue as we dropped, their field arrays vibrating with overloaded charge. Turbulence became untranslatable. The Veritas Nomad is one of the most stable long-range exploratory vessels ever constructed. Tri-axis gimbals, magnetic inertia distribution, autonomous gyroscopic balancing in all 12 degrees of motion. And still, we shook. The ship bucked like a living thing trying to leave a body behind. Wind speeds peaked at 740 kilometers per hour. We penetrated the second storm band in a controlled fall. Clouds gave way for brief seconds, showing flashes of the surface below. Mountains shattered, flattened, gone. We touched down on a rare basaltic plateau, shielded by an enormous crescent-shaped cliff that temporarily split the airflow, like a tooth in a roaring jaw. We called it the Eye of Brontis. The lightning never stopped. Each flash was visible even through our visor tinting, searing white and violet, illuminating the landscape like a strobe that had lost its rhythm. Thunder didn't roll here, it pressed. You felt it in your bones before you heard it, and it never faded, just thunder, always rolling, always nearby. We disembarked tethered, no magnetic boots. They shorted out at once. The air itself held a constant static charge. Every step made sparks leap from our heels into the rock. The sky flickered violet-black overhead, twisting in shapes too fast to follow, like fingers reaching through a curtain. I placed a probe on the edge of the cliff. Its sensors immediately detected ground current, enough to vaporize the unit within 22 seconds. The final data showed this. The storm above us was being fed by the energy rising from below. Vasari called me to the north ridge. There was a structure, half buried in ash and basalt. It jutted from the cliff face like the broken hilt of a forgotten sword. Triangular, made of obsidian-colored alloy we'd never catalogued, and not damaged by time, but worn smooth by electricity. We scanned it. It hummed. It was still active. The lightning here wasn't natural. It was being called down. Again and again, the bolts targeted the structure's highest point. A receiver, a conductor, a communicator. I placed my gloved hand on the alloy and felt nothing at first, then everything at once. Vibrations, rhythms, pulsing heat beneath skin and thought. It felt like a language shaped by voltage. And then, a moment I can't explain. The thunder stopped. Only once. One perfect second of silence. Then the sky split. Not a crack, not a lightning strike, a fracture. The storm seemed to tear along a seam in the clouds, revealing an impossible stillness within. A dome, floating, silent, vast. It hovered in the clouds like a thought that didn't belong in our minds. I don't know if it was a craft, or a watcher, or part of the planet itself. Then it vanished, and the storm resumed, as if embarrassed to have shown us anything at all. We returned to the ship. No recordings survived the interference. Only my memory and a flicker of that image burned into my peripheral vision. As we left the atmosphere, I whispered into my log, "Brontis VX does not have a storm. It is the storm." Mission Log. Alan Marcus, Deputy Commander, Veritas Nomad. Planet Designation, Numa 4. Timestamp, August 8th, 2034, Universal Sync. The cold came before we landed. Even before deceleration, the Veritas Nomad's hull temperature plummeted by 40 degrees Kelvin in less than 5 minutes. Cryo-shielding had to be increased to maximum to prevent microfracturing. That doesn't happen in vacuum, not unless the space around the planet itself is leaking entropy. Numa 4 was invisible from normal optical range. What we thought was a blank region of space turned out to be glareless. Light here doesn't reflect. It's absorbed. The planet's surface radiates no natural signature, and its atmosphere, though thin, is saturated with microscopic crystalline particles that distort waveforms. Even the stars look muted above it. We circled 3 times before sonar mapping revealed its shape, a sphere of near total albedo, coated entirely in a shell of hexagonal frozen matter. It was ice, yes, but not water ice, something denser, something resonant. We landed at the southern pole on a wide, flat expanse of this unbroken material. There were no mountains, no craters, no valleys, just silence, perfect, endless stillness. We disembarked with full thermal suits, each step across the surface echoing in our bones rather than our ears. The ice here was solid, but it felt hollow. It responded to our footsteps not with sound, but with vibration. Low pulses radiated out like sonar each time we moved, as if the ground was listening. We called it the Bell Surface. I deployed the seismic rig and dropped a probe 30 meters down through a laser-melted shaft. The shaft closed behind the probe, as if swallowed. 2 minutes later, it returned. A sound. Not a recording, a transmission. It wasn't artificial in tone, but it wasn't random either. It was a long, drawn-out chime that reverberated for 19.3 seconds in perfect harmonic intervals. The signal repeated every 6 minutes, each time shifting slightly in tone. We followed the direction of the resonance and arrived at a depression in the surface, a nearly perfect circle, 1 kilometer wide, with a ringed lip like a bell's mouth. At the center was a crystalline protrusion, a vertical column, 11 meters tall, that seemed to phase in and out of visibility depending on our angle of view. Vasari approached it first and placed her gloved hand against it. The column sank into the ice at her touch, slowly vanishing in a spiral motion. A moment later, the air sang. I can't describe it any other way. It was as if the planet had released a breath it had held for 1 billion years. A hum, low and beautiful, rolled across the plain. Not loud, but deep. We felt it more than heard it. It passed through our suits, through our bones, through the ship's hull. Instruments recorded no shockwave, no vibration, just resonance. And then we saw them. Shadows, just beneath the surface, moved slowly. Great shapes, graceful and terrifying, drifting through the translucent ice hundreds of meters down. Whale-sized, winged. Their motion didn't disturb the surface. Their forms rippled like dreams, some coiled, some humanoid, some utterly alien. They didn't come closer. They didn't acknowledge us. But I knew they saw us. We weren't alone on Numa 4. We were guests, or perhaps intruders. We stayed exactly 3 hours, 13 minutes, and 24 seconds. After that time, the chime began to grow discordant. The surface began to shift. Cracks formed in long, perfect lines, not from pressure but in patterns, symmetrical, mathematical, like the planet was rewriting itself. We departed without collecting physical samples. As we left orbit, Vasari looked back and whispered, "It wasn't ice. It was memory, frozen until disturbed." I agree. Numa 4 doesn't orbit time the way other planets do. It holds it, preserves it like a bell holds a tone, waiting for a hand to ring it. We rang it. I'm not sure we were supposed to. Mission Log, Alan Marcus, Deputy Commander, Veritas Nomad. Planet Designation, Carrack 5. Timestamp, 88.0730.0812, Universal Sync. We descended into shadow. From high orbit, Carrack 5 looked uneventful. A dusty orange world, banded in broad ochre plains with almost no discernible weather systems, no visible oceans, no polar caps. The sort of planet early scans would write off as barren. But when we shifted to topographical contrast mode, everything changed. The surface, once thought flat, was torn, cut through by gouges and trenches thousands of kilometers long and tens of kilometers deep. Not natural rifts, not like anything formed by erosion or plate tectonics. These were linear, sharp, some perfectly vertical, some branching into side fissures like veins carved by a giant scalpel, and they went down. The LiDAR scans we ran returned incomplete data, not because of interference, but because the beams never hit bottom. The deepest trench recorded was 142 kilometers, and that was where the beam signal ceased entirely. No reflection, no absorption, just disappearance. We named the largest canyon system the Maw of Carrack. We initiated descent with caution. Our VTOL systems could only take us so far before fuel reserves required backup planning. We deployed a gravity-tethered submodule, a sealed exploratory pod named Thresher, to drop into the primary trench. It vanished at 41 kilometers. No transmission loss, no collision warning, just a data dead zone. And then 3 minutes later, it came back online with new data. Impossible data. The trench wasn't vertical. It turned. Somehow, at precisely 41.3 kilometers depth, the chasm bent inward, at a mathematically perfect 72-degree angle, into a cavern of unmeasurable dimensions. The pod's camera showed walls that glowed faintly with bioluminescent markings, symbols, not random, repeating glyphs in a language that looked grown rather than inscribed. The walls weren't rock. They were composite strata, organic material fossilized into memory-layered carbon. The trench had been shaped, intentionally carved, by something that needed space, not for movement, but for containment. Vasari said, they weren't digging, they were sealing. We took the main ship down to the ledge at 18 kilometers, one of the rare shelf zones flat enough to safely hold the Veritas Nomad. Even then, we could feel the depth, an ache in the ears, a pull behind the eyes. Gravity remained normal, but perception did not. Sound changed. Speech no longer echoed. Instead, it extended, held longer than it should have, like each syllable was being kept by the trench itself. The walls radiated low-frequency resonance, barely above human perception. A pressure hum, continuous and directionless. I left the ship for a brief surface walk. The ledge stretched out like the edge of a coliseum. On the opposite cliff face, carved into the vertical wall, I saw vaults, doorway-like gaps spaced evenly apart, each exactly 33 meters tall, 9 meters wide, receding into blackness. They looked like open mouths. I focused my headlamp on one. It didn't reflect. It absorbed. I recorded 30 seconds of footage and then retreated. Back aboard, Vasari ran an acoustic scan of the trench floor. The sonar returned rhythmic peaks, spaced at regular intervals, like a heartbeat. The signal wasn't geological. It was not seismic. It was a living signal. We departed before the valley could respond. As we ascended, I glanced back through the viewing deck. I saw movement, just a flicker, far below, something unfolding, shifting inside the dark, like the ripple of something vast, turning in sleep. I logged the final observation. The maw of Carrick does not just reach downward, it remembers downward. There are things buried so deep, they no longer think in time. Mission Log. Alan Marcus, Deputy Commander, Veritas Nomad. Planet designation Oculus V. Timestamp 88.08.03.1507 Universal Sync. Some planets warn you, others deceive you. Oculus V did both. We arrived in System Theta 9229b, a binary star region with gravitational interference so erratic we had to perform a manual correction burn to stabilize orbit. Oculus V sat tidally locked to the smaller of the two stars, yet somehow there was daylight on all sides. Initial scans showed a barren landscape. Uniform gray-white surface, no vegetation, no magnetic field, no atmosphere. But then the anomalies began. The light was wrong. There were no shadows. The terrain lit itself with diffuse glow in all directions, but we couldn't trace any incoming solar radiation. Light existed here without a vector. Even with polarized visors, there was no clear distinction between day and night. It was as if the concept of direction had been quietly erased. And then we saw the ruins. From orbit, they appeared as tiny geometric disturbances in the terrain. Squares, spirals, perfect angles breaking the otherwise smooth topography. At first we mistook them for mineral formations, but they weren't. We landed near the largest cluster, which we later came to call the misaligned city. A ruined grid of structures, monolithic and opaque, each building facing outward, away from the center, as if the heart of the city was something they had to look away from. We disembarked cautiously. The air was thin, dry, and tasted of metal. No wind, no sound, only a high, inaudible pressure behind the ears, as though our brains were being gently pried apart. The buildings had no doors, no windows, just surfaces that shimmered faintly in the peripheral vision. Looking directly at them made them appear inert, but when viewed out of the corner of your eye, they shifted, slowly. One of the team reported a hallway that hadn't existed a second earlier. Another turned to take a photo and found himself standing on the opposite side of the plaza. No footsteps, no memory of crossing. The city rearranged us. I stood at what we guessed was the central square, a vast circle of mirror stone etched with angular grooves, impossible to decipher. A sphere hovered above it, roughly 5 meters wide, not floating, fixed in space, as if space itself had agreed to hold it there. The sphere hummed, only when you weren't looking at it. I circled around trying to understand its purpose. That's when I noticed something deeply unsettling. Every structure in the city, not just the outer ones, angled themselves away from the sphere. Even broken walls, even shattered fragments. Their lines recoiled, bent back as if trying to unsee whatever had been placed at the center. Vasari whispered, "This city didn't collapse. It chose to forget itself." Suddenly, all radios went silent. No static, no failure, just absence. The silence became oppressive. We tried to retreat, but every route we took bent slightly, subtly rerouting us back to the sphere. The ground tilted gently beneath our boots, nudging us toward it no matter how we turned. I forced myself to look directly at the sphere. And in that moment, I wasn't anywhere. I wasn't me. I became light folding inside out. Time thinned to transparency. And I saw, not memory, not vision, but the outline of a thought left behind by something that didn't think in time. And then I was back. Vasari pulled me out, literally. She had tied a retrieval cord to my suit. I collapsed on the stone and screamed without sound. The next thing we knew, we were back aboard the Veritas Nomad. Without having climbed aboard, we reviewed the exterior footage. None of us were ever seen returning. One frame we were outside. The next, the airlock closed. We left orbit in silence. In the aft cameras, the city changed shape. Walls reassembled. Pathways realigned. The entire layout pivoted 180 degrees, every structure now facing the sphere. It had turned to look back at us. Final log entry. Oculus V is not a city of ruins. It is a city of refusal. And we were not explorers. We were intrusions into something that never wanted to be understood. Mission log. Alan Marcus, Deputy Commander, Veritas Nomad. Planet designation, Pyrothal 4. Timestamp, 88.0811.146 Universal Sync. The noise started in orbit. Pyrothal 4 radiated in the infrared like a wounded star. Its atmosphere was a haze of heavy ash and sulfuric vapor, thick enough to register as fluidic mass at a distance. A deep red planet pockmarked with open vents, visible even from space, each one vomiting light into the void, like a beacon no one should answer. We knew it was volcanically active. What we didn't expect was the scale. The tallest peak, Mount Thalmaris, rose 48 kilometers from base to summit, a vertical continent of fire. Its caldera was wide enough to engulf an entire terrestrial city, with magma plumes that reached into the upper atmosphere and then fell back in molten rain. There weren't just volcanoes here. The entire planet was a volcanic structure. Crustal scans showed only a thin outer shell, barely 9 kilometers thick, floating on a subsurface magma ocean that shifted like a living thing. Every 6.2 hours, it exhaled, pushing new mountains upward in a process that looked less like geology and more like planetary respiration. We called it the breathing world. Landing was impossible on any traditional surface. Instead, we targeted a lava tube system on the northern flank of Thalmaris, where hardened basalt flows formed a brief shelf stable enough to support the Veritas Nomad's weight. The moment we touched down, the planet spoke. Not in sound, but in vibration, low pulses through the hull, subsonic waves perfectly rhythmic, timed, and deliberate. The AI flagged the pattern as musical, repeating intervals, complex yet structured, not random. Vasari whispered, "It's a rhythm, like a language built from tectonic pressure." We exited in full, heat-dampening exosuits, active cooling systems engaged, every joint reinforced. The ground beneath us steamed with ambient temperatures over 600 degrees Celsius. But the lava didn't just flow here, it moved with agency. Veins of glowing red snaked through the terrain in sine wave pulses, bending and folding in looping patterns like written glyphs. We stood on rock that was younger than our presence. Just 11 meters from the ship, we discovered a ridge, a natural basalt wall etched with ancient carvings, somehow unburned. Each symbol had been formed by cooling fractures in the rock, not carved but grown through temperature differentials. An alphabet of heat. We scanned it. The symbols matched no known linguistic database, but they mirrored the harmonic tremors rising from the crust. The planet's heartbeat was speaking in pressure and flame. Then, from the distance, came the siren of eruption. Mount Thalmaris bloomed. Not like a normal eruption, this was orchestrated. 5 plumes launched in perfect sequence, spaced by 0.7 seconds. Not chaos, choreography. Each jet of magma spiraled as it rose, curving into loops before raining back to Earth in molten ribbons. The ash cloud twisted, not randomly, but with form, like a sculpture of smoke trying to be remembered. I watched with my visor's thermal filters set to maximum and still had to turn away. In that moment, I felt something ancient looking back. Not sentient, not emotional, but aware. A will born not from mind, but from pattern. We retrieved a basalt sample near the lava stream. It was still warm, molten just 22 minutes earlier, and already it was cooling into the shape of a curve, spiraling gently. Spontaneous geometry in magma flow. We left at full thrust, ascending through a churning cloud of ash that painted the upper atmosphere blood red. As we passed above the tallest peak, all instruments shut off for 9.6 seconds. No warning, no reason. When they rebooted, the data logs had been overwritten with the harmonic pattern. Final log entry: Pyrothal 4 doesn't erupt. It composes. It doesn't destroy. It builds meaning from pressure. This is not a world on fire. It is a message written in mountains. Mission log: Alan Marcus, Deputy Commander, Veritas Nomad. System designation: Solemn Kel 3. Timestamp: 88.08.15.1108 Universal Sync. We didn't expect to find anything here. The charts called it a null system. No known planetary activity, no warp anchor points. Just a dim G-type star slowly bleeding heat into a cold void. But as we approached, something flickered. A shadow. Not planetary, not orbiting, surrounding. We ran the telemetry twice. There was a structure in place, a massive, scattered ring of artificial satellites and panels, some miles long, others barely intact, all tumbling in lazy, decaying orbits around the star. Not a ring world, not a shell, but a swarm, fragmented, eroded and silent. A Dyson Swarm. Or what used to be. We named the central structure the Broken Halo. Most of the swarm units were dead. Their solar collectors were shattered, faded, or warped by centuries of radiation. Others had fused into tangled masses of obsolete scaffolding, entire nests of burned-out hulls, each whispering of a civilization that once tried to wrap a star in purpose. We coasted in on silent thrust, letting momentum take us into the debris field. The Veritas Nomad glided between ruins, each fragment marked with inscriptions in alien syntax, long weathered into unreadable scars. Some still bore alignment thrusters, long frozen. Others looked cannibalized, as though the builders had begun dismantling themselves before they vanished. And then we saw the planet. It orbited just outside the densest cluster of dead collectors, Kalin 6, a pale, silent world with visible megastructures on its surface. Cities, spires, factories, all unlit. This wasn't just the remnant of a Dyson project. It was the grave of a Type II civilization, a race that had nearly succeeded in harvesting the full energy output of their sun, and failed. We entered low orbit and sent a long-range scan to the surface. The cities were intact but devoid of life. No power grid, no movement. Buildings stood like cracked teeth, casting long shadows across a faded surface. Even from orbit, we could see the decay. Once perfect domes collapsed, solar harvesters bent and crumbling, heat dissipation towers broken mid-rise. The AI filtered through ancient EM chatter still bouncing weakly through the system. Most of it was noise, but one frequency was rhythmic. A repeating sequence, an automated distress call still broadcasting from an orbital relay that had long since fallen out of sync. We patched in. It was a fragment of a voice, alien, ancient, degraded by time and interference. Translated, it said only, "We could not manage what we became. We cast nets around the sun, and it burned through us." Vasari stared out the viewport, her voice low. They became the cage they couldn't escape. We explored the closest intact swarm segment, a collector roughly 18 kilometers wide. Inside were empty racks of what once held solar plasma converters. The walls were marked with claw-like gouges, not damage, but scratching. Like engineers going mad in the end, trying to erase or rewrite what they had built. Somewhere deep in its core, we found a dormant node, its AI, long since fused into entropy. But its last directive still blinked on a cracked interface. Dissolution imminent. Archive all patterned thought. Recycle self. They knew. They knew the swarm would die, and so they turned their machines inward, not to preserve the structure, but to preserve themselves, in thought, in memory, in algorithms that now drift through the swarm like ghosts. We left a silent beacon behind. Nothing active, just a record, a name, a whisper across dark systems. Final log entry. The Dyson Swarm is no longer a machine. It is a memorial. The light that once powered their dreams now burns through their bones. They didn't fail to harness their star. They failed to carry the weight of becoming something that could.